Welcome to Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' comp podcast. Today, Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost is going to provide helpful information, tips, and advice for injured workers and their families. Scott's goal is to help you to maximize the benefits you receive. If working's got you hurting, sit back and listen to Scott address topics that matter to you. Friends, welcome back to this episode of Hurt at Work. Today we've got Scott Scheynost back in the studio. Scott, this is an important episode today because we're going to ask an important question that you hear almost every day. So welcome back and good to see you.
Good to see you, Jim. Glad to be here again.
So let's talk about this question. How much is my case worth?
Yes, the number one question I get asked in almost every case, there are two answers, the short answer and the long answer. I'm going to give you the short answer here in the next 30 seconds about how to figure out what your case is worth. Then I'm going to tell you why you need to look at some other factors. But in Kentucky, there is actually a website at the Kentucky Department of Workers' Claims. And if you go to this website and you enter the information into the website, this website will tell you exactly what your case is worth. This assumes that we're just talking about permanent partial disability. The easiest way to get this website is to type in Kentucky Department of Workers' Claims permanent disability calculator on Google, and you'll probably get a direct link to it. But this is the actual website address. It's kwworkersclaims.pubweb.ky.gov/pubweb/992 table calculator.aspx.
It's as efficient as government ever was. But,
of course.
I tell you what I'll do, Scott, is I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So if anybody just heard this and went, wait a minute, I lost that after the third, don't worry about it. It'll be in the show notes right below the player here, so you can click on it and check it out.
If you know 6 factors, then you can figure out what your case is worth in the state of Kentucky. Now, these factors are the date of the injury, your American Medical Association impairment rating, your average weekly wage, your date of birth, which also includes your date of your injury, your age at your injury, and then your employee formal education level. And in Kentucky, once you hit 12, it doesn't matter. If you've got a doctorate degree in physics, you still got a 12th grade education. So if you know those factors, you can put them into this table, and it will calculate your benefits. Now, there's 3 levels of benefits, and there's probably a couple of things that don't get included. For instance, if you're going to be older, an older employee, sometimes the benefits get cut off. But this will tell you how much your weekly benefits are worth. And there's 3 types of scenarios. 1, that you go back to work at your old wage. 2, that you don't go back to work at your old wage. 3, you go back to work, 3, that you can't go back to work at your old wage. So there's 3 levels of benefits, and essentially one of these 3 levels of benefits will apply to you if you are not totally disabled. If you're totally disabled, then you get 2/3 of your average weekly wage subject to the state maximum until you reach 70. Now, that's the easiest way to do that. These factors you think would be simple. I've had cases where I've argued over every factor, including the person's age. I've had folks that were not born in the United States, and they always list their age as January 1st, whatever the year is. That actually has an impact on their age, and the older you are, the more benefits you get. I've had people argue about their educational level. In some countries, going to the 6th grade is the equivalent of high school education, which is 12th grade here. Well, that doesn't really apply. You get more money if you don't have much education. Average weekly wage, it seems like I argue about in every case, unless somebody is just getting paid the exact same wage every week. If anybody's getting anything more than 40 hours a week, if they're getting overtime, or if they're getting less than overtime, their average weekly wage is almost always in dispute. Bonuses, fringe benefits, if you're working side jobs, concurrent wages. If you're working as a police officer and then you work for a security agency on the side, that gets included in your average weekly wage. I've argued over all of these factors before that go into this formula to determine your average weekly wage. But if you think you know what these numbers are, you can just punch those numbers into this formula, and it will tell you what your benefits should be. Now, this is just for permanent partial disability. This is really the short answer. That's the one almost everybody has a question about. What is my case worth? I think people ignore a lot of other things, though, that give their case value besides their permanent disability. For instance, in Kentucky, you get temporary total disability benefits, 2/3 of your average weekly wage, while you're off work and recovering for your injury. And, of course, we can argue about that because employer always thinks you need to go back sooner than you actually probably need to. So we always argue about temporary total disability benefits. And that can be a significant amount of money. Secondly, you have a right to reopen your case in Kentucky. If you have a surgery, get a 5-10% impairment rating, wait 3 or 4 years, have another surgery, impairment rating changes to 20%, you might be able to reopen your case. Well, it's got a new value now. And it gets to be very complex how you figure that, but a lot of people don't consider that right to reopen value and how much your case is worth. Other states don't have that value. For instance, in Indiana, I don't think you can reopen your case. So in Kentucky, the right to reopen your case is significant, especially for people who have injuries to their knee that might need a knee replacement later on, especially to have people that have had injuries to their back where maybe they've had a sprain that might lead to a discectomy, or maybe they've had a discectomy that might lead to a fusion. All those things change their impairment ratings, and all those things change their ability to earn money. In Kentucky, you've got like a 4-year window to get additional money after you settle your case or get an award from a judge. So it's not a big, long window, but still a lot of things can happen in those 4 years. And you got to remember, it takes a couple of years sometimes to get your case resolved after you have the injury. You may have the injury, you may have surgery, you might be off work for a year and a half. We might argue about how much your case is worth for 2 years. Well, that's 3 years down the road after the injury before we get your case settled. Well, you've got 4 years from that date to reopen to get more money. A lot of things can happen in that 4 years. I see a lot of knee replacements that happen, especially in older folks that are maybe older than me, I guess is over 40 years old anymore. But if you've had a minor knee surgery, torn meniscus, ACL tear, something like that, a lot of times that accelerates the arthritis in your knee and the natural aging process and can lead to a knee replacement later on. I see a lot of back injuries, too, that lead to fusions later on, too. All these things are additional money that you can get and put in your pocket that a lot of folks don't know about, a lot of folks don't consider. There's other things that get factored into your case. For instance, in Kentucky, you got a right to medical expenses. Indiana, you don't have that right. But, if you're going to have a knee replacement 5 years down the road, your employer might be willing to pay you $10,000 to go away so they don't have to pay for that $50,000 knee replacement 5 years from now, which will probably cost $100,000 5 years from now. So that's some extra value you have in your case is your right to medical expenses.
And that's why this question is never as easy as it seems, right? How much my case worth? So many factors out there, a lot of variables.
Well, everybody wants to know how much your case is worth. That website I gave you gives you a value, but if that website was always accurate, I would not have a job.
Yeah.
Because there's just a lot of other factors that come into play. One other thing people don't consider about is how does this impact your Social Security benefits? Sometimes if you get a workers' compensation award, well, you may get $700 a week, but if you're also getting Social Security disability benefits, if it's not set up the right way, you might wipe out your entire Social Security disability benefits. There's ways to minimize that and sometimes entirely offset what we call the Social Security offset. And that's not even a workers' comp benefit, but it has to be factored into the whole amount of money that you get. Because if it's not set up the right way, you actually get less money if it's not factored in.
That makes sense. And again, this is prefaced on the assumption that you're actually going to win your case or your claim is going to be successful. And that's really what you as an attorney with decades of experience, that's what you bring to the table. You know how to build this case. You know how to present the facts. You know the doctors and what the doctors need to say or not say in the records to really help support that case. I mean, it's not just I've been injured on the job, I automatically get paid. In theory, yes, but in reality, you still have to prove your case.
Yeah, in Kentucky, the injured worker has the burden to prove that they're entitled to benefits. What does that mean? It doesn't mean, it means you just can't say, I need money. It means you've got to go show you got hurt at work. It means you've got to show what your average weekly wage was. You've got to show that you were off work. You've got to show that you have a permanent disability. You have to do all that. How do you do that? Well, you get medical treatment together, you get medical records together, you testify about certain things, you prove the legal elements of your case to do all that. If you don't prove all the elements of your case, you're either going to get less benefits or maybe no benefits at all. But the burden of proof is on you to do this the right way, to produce all the right evidence, to make sure that your case is handled properly so you get all the benefits that you can receive. And again, the short answer about getting benefits is this website with this PPD calculator, but there's just a whole lot more stuff that gets factored into this that comes into play. If somebody says they were watching you and you didn't get hurt at work, they think that you're making this up. Well, we got to rebut that. If there's a videotape showing maybe this injury wasn't as bad as you said,
or you posted something on your own social media,
which sometimes happens.
Yep.
Claims adjusters love Facebook more than anybody.
Great discovery tool.
So if you have a work-related injury, I guarantee the first person is going to look at it as a claims adjuster.
Yeah.
If they can.
Yeah.
And if they can't, they're probably going to bug somebody that you work with to see if they can look at it for them. This one picture of you holding a pina colada at the beach that was taken 2 years ago is going to be the first thing they usually admit to show he's not hurt as bad. And for some reason, you can't enjoy your life once you have a work-related injury. But anything that they think shows that you're not totally disabled will be used against you later on. But again, everybody wants the short answer. The short answer is that website I gave you. Again, if you Google Kentucky Department of Workers' Claims PPD calculator, you'll get that website. You can crunch in the numbers. But generally, your case has got a lot more variables than those factors that are there that you put in there. And even those factors that you put in there can be changed around. Average weekly wage, like I mentioned before, all these things can be argued about.
And we've talked about that average weekly wage calculation. That's fairly complex. And again, people may not think that, well, I was hurt on my first job, but I also have a second job, and those wages or that income is actually calculated in there. They may forget that or miss that altogether because they were hurt on the first job, not the second job. It all counts in Kentucky.
Concurrent wages that your employer is aware of gets added into your average weekly wage, which increases that factor, which increases the amount of money that you can get. The American Medical Association Guides to the Evaluation of Impairment is the book that we use to figure out impairment ratings. It's about a 2.5, 3-inch page thick book. Most doctors that do workers' comp are familiar with it. I think there's 12 or 13 ways to give a different rating, to give ratings for, say, a leg injury, lower extremity injury, loss of range of motion, loss of strength, gait derangement, whether or not you have to use a cane or a crutch or wheelchair. There's a whole list of different ways to come up with these ratings. And what happens then is I can send you to 5 different doctors and get 5 different ratings for the exact same injury.
Well, and I guarantee you, and I hate to use that word on an attorney podcast, but it's not uncommon that a company may send you to a preferred physician to make that evaluation, which may actually kind of give you a lower rating than another more objective physician may assign, right?
In fact, I would be surprised if a company sent you to a physician that gave you a higher rating. The companies are generally hiring claims adjusters and third-party administrators to handle these cases. These folks generally handle these things exclusively. They know who in the system gives what as far as ratings. They generally have an idea about what the rating is going to be before you even see the doctor, and guess what? That's why you're being sent to that doctor. So there's ways to manipulate these numbers. I guess manipulation might not be the best way, but maybe trying to put the best numbers forward for your case might be a better way of saying it for both sides. If you've never done this before and you think you've got all these numbers figured out, just be careful. That's all I can say. I've seen impairment ratings, computed incorrectly before. Average weekly wage always seems to be 40 hours time your hourly rate because the adjuster doesn't want to spend the 3 hours it takes to actually do the calculations to consider your overtime, deduct the overtime premiums, add your bonuses in for the year, spread that over for 52 weeks, divide it into 4 quarters, divide it into 13 weeks. Yeah. You get the best of the fourth quarter. It's very complex. Most adjusters don't want to spend the time doing that stuff. Educational level, a lot of folks don't have a high school diploma, but they've put it down on different things that they do. You always have to be truthful in your documents that you file with the Department of Workers' Claims. Maybe you've told somebody that you had a high school diploma, but when you don't have a high school diploma, that actually helps you get additional benefits. All these things have to be reviewed very thoroughly to make sure the information is accurate and that somebody's getting the best benefits that they can possibly get.
You brought up something that I think is really interesting in the Kentucky workers' compensation law. Is the lower your education, there's a higher probability that your benefits may be increased. And do you want to explain why that is? That's the ability basically to get a different type of job, right?
Right. The theory behind it is that if you have less education, it's going to be harder for you to find a job, especially a job that is not labor intensive. So to compensate for that, the legislature has increased the benefits for folks that have less education. And like I said, in Kentucky, 12th grade and above is all considered the same. But, if you've got a 10th grade education, you get more than if you had a 12th grade. If you've got an 8th grade education, you get more 6th grade. So there's several factors that they look at. And essentially, if you have less education, you get more money out of the workers' comp system.
Which is really counterintuitive, but it's
Correct.
to protect the worker, because that worker who now has an injury and has some level of disability or impairment may not be able to return to that specific type of job, and they can't go and sit behind and do computer work if all they've done is work on the assembly line.
Yeah, for the 55-year-old guy that's got a 10th grade education, he's not going to be able to go back to Sullivan and get a degree in learning how to do Excel. It just is not going to work. It's not
practical.
It's not practical. He hasn't done it before. He's worked in physical labor all his life. He's going to have a hard time finding something that he can do. If he finds something, it's going to be probably not anything like he did before, where he was making a good wage. So it's a legitimate reason to bump up somebody's benefits, because those individuals with less education are just going to have a harder time finding a decent job in the workforce. Their possibilities are more limited for everything, both the jobs that are out there and chances for advancement. So it makes sense to do that. I wish that there were other factors like that in the workers' comp system. But that is something that everybody needs to consider in this too.
Well, so the assumption that, the system's going to work on my behalf, sometimes it does, but you still have to know to bring up these cases, and you still have to argue the point, because I would think the insurance adjuster is not just going to want to hand you money. That's not how they make money.
Well, they make money by not handing you money.
Bingo.
Their supervisor likes it when they pay less in claims, not more. And really, most people, I think, need an advocate on their side. Every now and then somebody gets lucky. That seems to be the only real way somebody can do it on their own, to me at least, after doing this for so long. And every now and then somebody does. They actually, get an impairment rating like they're supposed to and get offered the money like they're supposed to. But there's a lot of things that can happen. If you have a permanent injury, you're supposed to get an impairment rating. A lot of insurance companies will not request an impairment rating. If they don't request an impairment rating, they are not required to make you an offer that has an impairment rating. So, if you got hurt at work and you have a permanent injury, if you don't ask your doctor for it, if your attorney doesn't ask your doctor for it, you may never get a rating. And again, the burden's on you to take care of yourself. So I've seen a lot of insurance companies that will not request an impairment rating because they know they've got to do some other things, pay you more money down the road. I have seen some insurance companies get an impairment rating and not do anything with it, even though they're supposed to. And then I've seen companies get ratings and not disclose that to the injured worker, who can then look at it to see if it's accurate or not, see if the doctor did things that they were supposed to do.
And realistically, if this is your first significant injury, you may not know, relative to everyone else out there, is this a fair rating? But when you work with an attorney, such as Scott Scheynost, who has actually done this for many, many years, you kind of have a sense for, that type of injury, and that's probably going to result in this range of an impairment rating. But you have a background and an experience level that allows you to make that judgment call.
Yeah, I wanted to give that website with that easy access to the permanent partial disability calculator at the beginning, because that's the number one question everybody asks. Now, my experience, though, is that might be the number one question everybody asks, but it shouldn't be, because there's so many other factors that come into the workers' compensation claim. And, it seems like it should be simple. It seems like this one formula should take care of everything. But there's just so many moving parts to it that you really need to get somebody that knows what they're doing to sit down and go over this with a fine-tooth comb. You could get lucky. You could get the right number. You could get the right amount. Generally, when you're talking about a minor injury, something that doesn't really have a big impact on somebody's life, the money then is going to be smaller, and it probably doesn't have much of an impact. But as the injury gets more significant, as it affects you more, if you're not able to do your job, the bigger the impact is on your life, the more you need to sit down and look at all these variables. And in addition to the workers' comp claim, there might be other things floating around out there. You might have a third-party claim against somebody. Let's say you're riding in the car at work and get rear-ended because you're driving a company truck. Well, you may have a lawsuit against the person that drove you, hit you. Or if you're at work and somebody has something that falls on top of you, you may have a lawsuit against another employer for their negligence there that you might be able to recover outside of workers' comp claims. In addition, there's other sources of recovery. For instance, you might have a Social Security disability claim if you can't work in this, or if you can't work in any occupation the rest of your life. And there's other things that might come into play too, short-term, long-term disability, things like that. But the more significant the injury is, the more you should sit down and talk to somebody to go over things. I handle things on a contingency fee, which means we don't charge you anything unless we recover things for you. We may have to charge you for expenses and things like that. But in general, if you call me up and ask me about your case, I'm not going to charge you anything. I'm going to give you my evaluation of it. You don't have to hire me. You can call 3 other attorneys after you talk to me. And I hope you do, because that's your job. You need to make sure you're comfortable with me. But it doesn't really cost much. It's usually a free phone call. We try to get back with you as soon as possible. It doesn't hurt at all to do it. I can't understand why more people don't do it, to be honest with you. But I think a lot of people don't want to mess with attorneys. I understand that. I never liked to mess with attorneys before I became one. We try to use big words sometimes, and we try to make ourselves sound a little bit more important than we probably are. But the bottom line is I am here to help you. That's my whole purpose, is to try to help the injured worker. We've done this for a while. I'm happy to answer just about any questions we can about your case. It's a free phone call. It doesn't cost anything. It's a free service. I hope you use it. If you don't call me, I hope you call somebody else that does the same thing.
And Scott, if I'm listening to this and thinking, Scott's right, I do need to get somebody to take a look at this or just answer some questions. What's the easiest way for them to call your office?
Well, have a phone number that's 502-937-5287. That's 502-937-5287. If you call that number, we'll get back with you. Also, you can contact me through my website, ScheynostLaw.com. You just have to be able to spell Scheynost, ScheynostLaw.com. And I think you'll put up a link on that for us.
Yeah,
okay, great.
We'll put all those links in the show notes, including the phone number. But you can go right to the website, and there's a contact us page. Right. You can type in your questions or a little bit about your case, whatever you feel like supplying, and that'll go right to Scott, and Scott will review it and get back to you as quickly as possible.
In general, we have some people that assist us with that, but I'll try to get back with you within 24, 48 hours, maybe if it's on the weekend. But you'll be dealing with me, and I'll try to get back with you as soon as possible about that stuff.
And Scott, you had mentioned these third-party claims. That's a whole other issue that people just totally forget about. And I believe we've done an episode of this podcast on third-party claims. And if so, I'll go back and make sure we have a link in the show notes to that. Because, again, that's where you may be on the job and you've been injured. So ideally, you fall under Kentucky Workers' Comp. But if there's a third party involved, such as a subcontractor
right.
or a UPS driver,
right.
or maybe just another driver because I'm a delivery person,
right.
There may be another claim out there that you pursue at the same time.
Right.
And, oh, by the way, as you said earlier, there also may be a Social Security disability claim.
Again, my object here is to try to put as many benefits in the client's pocket as possible. And we try to look at all those different areas that might be sources of recovery for that. A minute ago, I think earlier we were talking with Pat Roth from the Uninsured Employers Fund about being able to recover workers' comp benefits from employers that don't have workers' comp insurance.
Right, that was in episode 13, and I'll definitely put a link to that one.
Yeah, and there's just different ways that can sometimes be used to recover benefits. And again, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't usually cost anything just to talk to somebody, to consult with them about these things. And I think the bottom line is that there's an easy way to figure out what your case is worth, but that's just almost too easy sometimes.
It's a preliminary number. As you say, it's a lot more complex. There's a lot more to it.
Right. There's just so many variables that have variables to them. But again, there is a website. If you can figure out those factors, then you can plug in the numbers and you can get the calculations.
And Scott, that makes a lot of sense. Now, let me ask you this. If I'm hurt in Kentucky, obviously that naturally to me sounds like a Kentucky workers' compensation. But my employer doesn't actually have to be located in Kentucky. Is that right?
That's correct. If you're hurt in Kentucky and your employer might be out of Michigan, you're driving through going to Florida to deliver a load of hay, for instance. Even though your employer is in Michigan, you're going to Florida. If you get hurt in Kentucky, it's a Kentucky workers' compensation. It's covered by Kentucky law. And therefore, you're eligible for Kentucky workers' comp benefits, which are generally better than a lot of the states around it, in Indiana, Tennessee, and some other states. So, again, it doesn't hurt to talk to somebody in the state to see what might be available to you. You can also be working for a Kentucky employer and injured in another state. For instance, if your employer is based out of Kentucky and you're driving a truck for them in Michigan, you might be eligible to receive Kentucky workers' compensation benefits through Kentucky.
Or I'm a sales rep, for instance, and maybe I'm out in Tucson, Arizona.
Correct.
And I get in a car wreck.
And and that's a whole interesting situation because you've got Kentucky workers' compensation benefits and you got the benefits that might be available through the car accident. Even PIP, even though Arizona is not a no-fault state.
Right.
And we're going down another road here, but
right.
The bottom line is there just might be a lot of things available for you if you don't talk to somebody that has a little bit of idea about how this works.
But again, that's why having an experienced attorney who can really help you to think through this and whose job it is to think through how do we maximize all avenues of benefits and compensation to the injured worker. These are important considerations because some of these could be career ending. And so life's going to be very, very different moving forward. And for that reason, you need to factor in all of these different elements to make sure you've got the best possible case or claim.
All right, I'm gonna give the website again for the Department of Workers' Claims. If anybody's still listening and still wants to get that website, it is kwworkers.pubweb.ky.gov/992tablecalculator.aspx. And again, that's at the Kentucky Department of Workers' Claims. That's underneath their publications, and it's also underneath PPD, which stands for Permanent Partial Disability, PPD Calculator. Again, if you type in KYDWC PPD Calculator in Google, it'll probably take you directly to that. That's the short answer for all this. For the long answer, go to ScheynostLaw.com, and we've got about a 5-page FAQ that could deal with all the other things that come up that are not listed in this table. And there are a ton of those things. If you ever get bored on a Sunday night and want to figure out what else could happen in your workers' comp claim, go to that. Try to go through the FAQ. I think
frequently asked questions.
Frequently asked questions. I'm sorry, and it addresses a lot of the issues. I hope that gives you a lot of information that might be helpful for your case. Also, again, I'm happy to talk to you to give you my 2 cents worth. If you don't talk to me, feel free to call some other attorneys that do workers' comp. There's a lot of us out there. Everybody handles these on a generally contingency fee basis, and I think everybody that does this stuff is more than happy to give you some free advice about where this might be going.
That makes a lot of sense. Scott, any closing thoughts, or is that kind of a wrap for this episode?
No, I've been wanting to give this real short answer to what my case is worth for a long time, so I've done it, and it's out there, and I'm interested if anybody actually does this, if they could let me know if it works or not for them, just as a personal piece of information, because I get this asked probably 4 or 5 times a week. And I'm interested if anybody will actually go to this website and actually do this and get the numbers. If you do that, I would appreciate it if you let me know. And that way, at least, I know I'm giving out some good advice.
That makes a lot of sense. Hey, Scott, I know you're busy. I want to thank you for your time today. Thanks for coming into the studio and putting together this information for people out there who may have a case and they're dealing with it and trying to figure out what the best route, how they need to file the claim, how they need to handle the claim, or whether or not they need to pick up the phone and have you do it for them. So, as always, thanks very much for your time.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And friends, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Hurt at Work. Scott will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. For more information, be sure to visit ScheynostLaw.com. That's SCHEYNOST law.com. You can also follow Scott's Workers' Comp office on Facebook. Until next time, be safe and remember, Scott's ready to help, especially when you and your family need it the most.